How touchy are mature bucks when you get close to their bedding areas? What can you do to tip the scales in your favor once you locate his bed? Our guest today could teach the masterclass on big buck bedding as the hunting beast himself joins us right here on the Rack Factor Podcast. Welcome to the Rack Factor Podcast, where we discuss the factors that lead to bigger bucks and a healthier deer herd. The Rack Factor Podcast is presented by Rack Fuel Premium Deer Nutrition. From premium deer mineral to deer feed, premium food plot seed to deer attractant, Rack Fuel products maximize the health and potential of your deer herd year-round. Visit rackfuel.com and fuel your herd. Our guest today shoots a lot of big deer. He is probably best known for his public land whitetail hunting, his hang and hunt mobile style, and for being the co-founder of Hunting Beast Gear. Dan Infalt joins us on the Rack Factor Podcast tonight. Hey, Dan, how are you doing?
Real good. How you guys doing?
Good. Thanks for coming on, Dan.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, we appreciate you carving out a little time right during hunting season. But I got to ask, do we thank you or do we thank your wife, Carol, for allowing you to spend a few moments tonight with us?
I don't think she even knows where I am right now.
All right, Dan. So how did your name become kind of synonymous with public land hunting? Where did that all start?
Probably when I started releasing DVDs on how to hunt public land. So that started with a company called Blood Brothers and then morphed into Hunting Beast Outdoors that everybody knows now. I did a series of DVDs on how I killed big bucks on public land, and they really took off pretty wildly. As a matter of fact, they, videos or DVDs that I created back in the late 90s, early 2000s are still selling today almost as much as what they were when we made them. Carol ships them out daily. It's amazing.
That's really impressive considering, how easy it is for people to get everything online. You just don't hear about people buying the DVDs. That's super impressive.
Have you ever thought about putting that content out in an online format?
We have. I've just never did it. I got a whole bunch of stuff in the fire. It's crazy how busy I am. The YouTube really keeps me busy too. I mean, that's really taken off. We got 70,000 followers. I try to keep them up to date on everything that's going on with our hunting, weekly. And I still, besides working with Hunting Beast Gear and Hunting Beast, which are two different companies, I also work in a machine shop for 40 hours a week. So,
jeez,
I had to give something up, so I gave up sleep.
No wonder you need the monster.
I was going to ask you if you were still working in the shop, but apparently you are.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I keep thinking about retiring. I just never do.
One of the things that you're also well known for is hunting sign. So when you're scouting, if there are buck beds on a property that you're scouting, Dan, how do you find them?
Usually based on terrain or the way the cover lays out, elevation, those types of things. After you look at it enough over the years, you start to see trends on how deer bed and particularly how big bucks bed. And after a while of looking at bedding areas, you can kind of read them to the point where you can go into a property blind and look at it and say, okay, they're going to be in there if they're here,
So what are the telltale signs that it is a buck bed? How are you able to read that? And are you able to tell even if it's a mature buck?
So I mostly look at buck bedding in the spring or winter time. I stay out of it during the rest of the year. I make my setups where they come out to. So the way I determine buck bedding from doe bedding is that bucks bed different than does. Now, solitary does, one or two does, will bed in buck bedding areas, just like bucks do. But groups of does bed further out, more in the open, They bed circular in fashion, each facing a different direction. They don't relate on wind so much. Where a buck will, he beds solitary, like he's a loner. So he'll worry about where the wind's coming from, what he can see. So he'll have his back up against an obstacle. He'll always be facing downwind, smelling behind him. So he'll have the cover to his back and vision to his front, or he'll use sound or something. But usually when you see a mature buck's bed, there's a wow factor. There's like, how would I ever get near this thing? He's got everything taken care of. And what has made me successful is to treat it like a detective and try to figure out some sort of flaw in his armor.
So do you backtrack kind of from where those beds are when you're doing that detective work, trying to figure out where you can intercept them best?
Yeah, usually I love to hunt them in the evenings mostly. You can't always do that, but they're very predictable in the evenings. It's the trails that you see coming out of the bedding areas are the trails they walk out on. Now, sometimes you're really lucky and there's one trail that comes in and out of a bedding area, and then it's pretty cut and dry where to set up. Sometimes there's multiples. But when they go in the morning, they tend to circle to the downwind side, smell the bedding area, make sure it's safe before they come in. And they tend to bed before daylight a lot. But in the evening, they tend to usually get up well within daylight and at least move, 50 or 75 yards while it's light enough to shoot. And then they take that set trail. So it's a lot easier to do in the evening. In the mornings, I tend to hunt a little further back. And when you start to get to rut time frame, they'll still bed in the morning before daylight a lot, but they seem to get back up at like the 8-9 o'clock time and move to other bedding areas or to doe bedding areas and things like that. And they move a lot more and a lot more distance, so you can catch them a lot more in the mornings during rut. But the bed hunting of specific buck beds in the morning is difficult.
Okay. So you're an expert really for scouting any type of terrain, whether it's bluffs or farmland or swamps. Of those three, and that's what most of the people that are, up in here in the Midwest are hunting. Which one of those is the hardest to scout and pattern mature buck?
Geez, I think they're pretty equal. They're very different though. I mean, if you look at like, probably big woods is fairly difficult. If it's flat, monotonous land,
Yeah.
or very big, like tamarack swamps or something can be fairly difficult. But they each got their own little niches about how you go about it.
So which one of those do you like to hunt the most?
Well, in a perfect world, I like swamps in early season because
Okay.
I can really get close to the bedding areas and the whole acorn things. If there's acorns dropping, they're isolated. The deer are going to the acorns. You can get in between the acorns and the deer. Where you get into hills or big woods and stuff, and acorns can be a flaw because they're everywhere and the deer just stand up and eat. And but come rut, it's a lot easier to pinpoint the bucks in hill country. So I'd go from farm country from swamp to hill country during the rut, and then in the late season, I think farm country is the easiest because you get the deer they all go to one food source.
Right.
And they get easier to hunt in that terrain where you can see them from a distance, you can observe them and stuff. So in a perfect world, it would be swamps and marshes early season, hill country and rut, and farmland in late season.
That makes sense.
What is it about the hill country during the rut that kind of gives you an advantage as a hunter, kind of tips it in your favor, so to speak?
They tend to use the elevation a lot. So you can take a map of hill country, like a topo map, and look at the leeward sides and look where you've got a leeward hillside where the wind's blowing over that hillside, and that hill connects the bedding area that's leeward, and the bucks will go from one bedding area to the other along the elevation where the wind meets the thermal rise. So if you, it narrows down the map to where you have to go. So you take a huge area and you can make it like 10% where the deer would be, and then I'll take that 10% and I'll look at what I think where all the people will go, and I'll look at the spots where I don't think people will go, and it'll make that map very tiny real quick on the spots that are potential for me to hunt.
So you're looking for saddles, for benches, those types of things when you're looking at a topo map?
I don't look for saddles as much as other people do. I kind of look for bedding areas that are close together, that are thick cover, that maybe are got a lot of doe bedding around them, and an area in between them that isn't a long distance, that's leeward. And I find that usually mature bucks won't want to travel like a ridge that's a quarter mile long from bedding area to bedding area. They usually make very short distances or short travel patterns in daylight. So I try to find the ones that are close together and get in between them, up on that leeward side.
So other than buck beds, Dan, what would you consider to be the most important thing that hunters should really pay attention to when scouting?
For me, it's all about bedding when it's scouting. I'm looking at where, because to me, when I look at what a deer's buck's doing, the majority of the mature bucks that I've shot, I shoot within 75 to 100 yards from their beds, and I still shoot them at closing time. I'll watch them get up sometimes,
Okay.
or hear them get up, and by the time they get to me, it's closing time. So if you're any further back, you're not killing them. Now, that's not all the time, but that's a good majority of them. And I think that's a big part of my success, is being within that daylight window of movement. Now, you might get a day or two where that buck gets up early and he's frisky and he goes for a mile in daylight. But if they did that all the time, they'd die real quick.
Right.
And everybody will get lucky every now and then hunting rubs and scrapes and all that kind of stuff. But to be consistent, and especially on pressured land, I think you've got to really push that envelope with the bedding. So as far as scouting, I'm looking at the bedding. I'm looking for the terrain features that hold bedding. And then when I find a bedding, I'm going, in the wintertime, I'm going right into those bedding areas and picking them apart. I want to know when that deer is bedding there, because they have time frames. A lot of times it'll be a 2 or 3 week window when they bed there. And you got to try and figure out, when are they here? And then you got to look at, how are they leaving when they're here? And where can I set up? How far can they see? What can they smell? What can they hear? I'm picking my trees. I'm marking them on a map. And then I'm coming back and I'm hunting those during those time frames. And usually I only hunt a spot once. If I run into some really hot sign, I might come in at it again, or I might come in at it from a different way, or I might start narrowing down that area and looking for more bedding areas, knowing there's something big in that area if I find the right sign. But that's basically how I do it.
So if you're only hunting them one time, now do you move to a different spot and hunt a different deer, and then occasionally come back in, so you have more than one chance to get it done?
So what I find is you can hunt those spots about 3 times a year, and you push it any more than that, those bucks just disappear and they start bedding someplace else, and the place goes bad. And to make a point on that, I've had several spots where, obviously it's public land, somebody else finds it, especially more in recent years, because more people are starting to hunt like this now.
Right.
And you go in one day and you find a tree stand and a trail camera right in that staging area. and you just watch that place die. You watch all the rubs go away that were there. You watch the sign go away. You see the bedding area go bad, and that guy will still hunt it, and he'll come back, and he'll come back, and in some cases, a couple years they hunt it.
Right.
And then when that guy leaves, I'll watch when he finally gives up because now this area sucks. I'll go back and I'll try and hunt it, or I'll monitor it. I'll check it in spring and such. And some of those places, it takes 2 or 3 years for the deer to come back to them.
Really?
They're very touchy. And that's part of that,
Right.
like when I could see your questions rolling in your mind when I said it. I said I hunt these spots usually once a year. And
Yeah, because I was about to ask you a question, and then you answered it, and I was like, okay. Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, it makes sense.
yeah, well, they're touchy. I mean, it's not like hunting a food plot because, deer have different levels of tolerance based on where you're at. They don't tolerate you near their bedroom. I mean, it's the equivalent of if you went out in your yard and walked out back and went 100 yards behind your house and you found bear tracks. You'd be like, whoa, that's disturbing, right? There shouldn't be a bear here.
Right.
What's he doing?
Right.
A couple of days, you probably forget all about that. You might have told your friends and stuff, but you forgot about it, right?
Right.
You come home and you find those bear tracks walking through your window into your kitchen, and you're not forgetting about it. You're doing something about it. Whether you're barring the windows or you're getting out of town, you're doing something. And when you walk into that buck's bedding area, when he discovers you're there, he's not happy. Sometimes those mature bucks are hard to kick out of a bedding area, but they will decipher exactly how you went in there, where you were, what you're doing. They'll come out a different way. They'll be very hard to kill after you've put pressure on them. You put more pressure on them, and then you really make them smart. So it's about timing and putting on the right amount of pressure. I think the biggest mistake people make is they're so worried about scaring that buck out of there that they hold back a little. They don't push that envelope. And if you don't push the envelope and kill him the first day, after that first day, it is very, very difficult.
They're just masters of that environment, and they basically pick up that you're there.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. A couple of years ago, I took and I broke down the deer I've shot. And I'm a guy who really analyzes things and finds out the whys. I don't think anything really happens by happen chance, especially if there's a pattern to it happening. So if you look at the bucks that I've harvested over the years and their age classes, when you look at the middle-aged bucks that are real good bucks, the 2 or 3 year olds that were mount worthy, when you look at those, the majority of them came from rut hunting. They came from hunting a stand more than one time, doing just the opposite of what I'm preaching, right? I've been in that stand 3 times. I shoot this buck, or I go back for him and I get him. I work for him and get him. But when you look at my top 15 bucks, the ones that are 5 years old or older, the overall majority of those were the very first time ever I hunted a tree. And then a few more of them were, now a lower percentage, were the first time I hunted a tree that year. And there's only a couple of those that came from hunts that I've hunted more than once. I mean, it's the complete opposite of the 2 and 3 year old pattern. It's like they're 2 different animals.
Right.
And if you think about it, just about everybody I talk to, like when I do a seminar or something, I'll stop and I'll ask people, think about it. Your top bucks, the ones that you think are 5 years old or older, were they on the first time you ever sat a spot? And then how often do you sit a spot twice or more? And most of those people will tell you, well, I sit spots twice or more all the time. But you're right, that buck was the first time I ever went in that spot. Or,
right.
It's quite often that those big bucks find some niche where nobody goes, and you just it's the first day you're in there,
Yep. All right, Dan. So if you were to write a script, kind of walk us through a scenario where you're scouting a mature buck, kind of the time frames that you do that to when you actually hunt him, and then you kill him.
Okay. So last year's buck, I shot that one on the 5th day of the season. I hunted him for about 3 or 4 years. That buck lived in a cattail marsh, and you could not get him to leave a certain area of that marsh. And the trouble with it is there's very, very few trees, and it's just thick, dense marsh, and he would just live up on high spots, and he wouldn't come out in daylight. And there's private ground up against it that he could get up onto. So it was very difficult to hunt that deer, but I kept trying. And the few little spots you could hunt that where they were actually huntable, where there's a tree or a bush I could get a stand in or something, just weren't panning out because he knew those as danger spots. You know, you put a camera there, you get pictures of them, but you hunt there, you would never see them. And it just seemed to me that he knew that those were huntable spots, and he would check them before he'd come into them, in daylight, like he'd wind them or something was going on. And what happened with him when I finally got him is a couple years ago, I just went on a mission because I knew that deer was in that small area and it was bothering me in my head. I think about him when I was sleeping. And I went out there and I really started looking at that area close, even though I knew it intimately. I just went out there and I scouted it really close in wintertime when it was frozen and you could walk on top of the water because it's a pretty nasty area. You'd fall through to your armpits and stuff. And I went through there really hard and really looked at it. And I found this little rise out there that you couldn't see on an aerial or anything or a topo because it just looked like cattails, but it wasn't. It came up out of the cattails, just a small little area. I want to say like 30 feet long and 20 feet wide. And it was grass in the cattails, but one edge of it up against the cattails was willow brush. And I went over and I looked at that willow brush, and because it was out of the water, it was all solid beds. And all the willow brush was rubbed. There was hundreds of rubs in this little tiny area, and big aggressive rubs, and the beds were big. And it was obvious to me that a big buck was using that. And him and 2 other bucks I was interested were in that area. And there wasn't a lot of little stuff in that area. There was no high density. And I was pretty certain that based on the rub height and everything else, that it was probably him. And probably those other 2 were probably bedding there at some point too. So then when I looked at it, I was like, okay, so when's he bedding here? Now, willow brush loses its leaves in early October. Like it's starting to lose their leaves right now. So no buck is bedding there when the sun is blaring down on them. So I'm assuming those are summer beds, but there's rubs in them. So our season opens here right about when they're done, shedding velvet. So
right.
Those rubs are done during season.
Right.
So there's a window of a few weeks when there's leaves on those trees, when they could bed there, when all those rubs are made and all those beds are there. And it was generations of that. So that told me that time frame of the first week or 2 of the season is when that buck is living there. So now there was a trail coming out of that there was trails all around, obviously. In cattails, you had networks of trails, right? You can get it with water. But there's one trail that came out of that bedding area that right at about waist height, all the cattails were broken off, and you could tell a rack went through there or was going through there on a regular basis, breaking these cattails. So that only went about 75, 80 yards, and it came into this little grass opening, and there was some brush. There was another like high spot, but it connected with high ground. It went up into private land, and there's a pile of brush there, and it had this little thorny tree in there that was about, I want to say 6 inches around, and it looked like I could get a stand up about as high as I could reach, maybe a little higher, and with 2 sticks I could get up and I could get a stand in there, and if I cut some buckthorn holes, so I could see 2 different ways, and that buck came down that trail, I'd have a shot at him. So in the winter when he's not in there, because they vacate those marshes in the winter, and I have no idea where he goes. He comes back in the summer. I cut these holes, set up that tree to put my stand in it, and then I left it alone. Didn't go back. And then in July, because the way it laid out, you'd have to walk through the bedding to get to the tree, which is probably why nobody ever got into there. So I went in July and I made a path and marked it through the cattails and water up to my waist in a semicircle around that bedding area as best I could to get to that tree, but felt it was close enough that I'd be probably heard. Now, I didn't go right to the tree because I didn't want to taint that area, but I went to where I could, when I hunt, make it to the tree quiet from there. And I waited for a wind that'd be in my face and a very brisk wind to hunt it. And a couple days into the season, I had that wind, and I went in there for the hunt, and I waded through the water, and the wind covered my noise. Got in there, set up my stand, got in the tree, and just off the ground, just to the openings. And I wasn't up there about a half an hour, and a doe got up. It's probably a doe fawn, but it got up about 20 yards from me, to my right. Not even 20 yards, maybe 15 yards. I set up that stand with that thing, never knowing I was there. But I did have a really good wind.
Nice.
It gets up and just starts feeding off. Well, then Mama in front of me, 25 yards, stands up on the edge of the cattails, which, like I said, the does tend to bed further up, She gets up and some other does get up. Well, she gets up and she walks straight at me. And while she's feeding her way through the brush, eating the buckthorn leaves, I hear something get up in that willow brush, because it's not that far from me, And then I hear it come into the cattails, and you can't see it because the cattails are probably 10 foot high. You can hear him in there, but you can't see him.
Right.
When he's sinking down into that water, those cattails are way over the top of his head. But you hear something coming through up that buck trail from that. And meanwhile, that doe is getting closer and closer, and she walks into the brush underneath me and walks right underneath me. And remember, I'm only like 10 feet off the ground. And she walks right up against my tree, and she turns her head and she looks at the tree and sees my stick on the side of the tree. And you got to remember, that's like her kitchen. It's like you walking into your kitchen, and all of a sudden you got one extra kitchen chair, and it's white, and you're like, I'm the only one that lives here. What's that doing here? So she's staring at that stick, and then she goes up to the second one, and then she goes up to me, and she just loses it. She jumps to the ground and blows and jumps over the brush, and then runs back where she came, which is right in between me and what I believe to be my incoming buck, and just starts blowing and blowing and blowing and won't stop. And it went on for about 5 minutes, and finally she stomped her way off into the cattails, and you could hear whatever was coming, which I envisioned being my buck, way off in the distance, leaving. Not running, but just walking another way. He did not want nothing to do with that. So, just to keep him honest, I went out there again the next day, and if I'm going to do that, I'm going to do it right away before he comes in there and smells I was there. Went in there the next day, and not a thing moved. And then I vowed, and I stayed out of there for the whole rest of the year. Didn't touch it. So then, this last season, I waited for the first brisk north wind. As soon as I had it, I took my route in there, went back to that same tree, got up that tree, and this is the third time I hunted it. And no does this time. About the same time period, I heard the buck get up in the willow brush, start coming my way. And I just watched the trail until he popped out, walked over, and I shot him. And it was the buck I envisioned was bedding there. And that's when everything works out great. And I tell you what, that will never even touch shooting a giant buck on a food plot, because when you plan and plot and try to figure him out, and you figure out where he's living, and you go to him and you set it up, and you pick the one tree out of a giant entire forest that you have to be in, and the wind you have to be there, and you kill that buck. That's an incredible feeling of accomplishment that somebody who's not you will never get. But that's a really cool way to hunt. It's not the only way to hunt, and there's other ways to kill big bucks that might even be better, like leasing a piece of property and having food plots and stuff, and you probably don't have to kill yourself in a swamp, right? But this is what I enjoy to do.
Right. There's no one that's listening to you say that and tell this story that's not, like, wow, that's incredible. I mean, everything that you had to go through, even just going through the swamp. I mean, that's the story. That's as good as it gets right there. That's awesome.
How old was that buck, Dan?
I figure he's probably at least 7 based on the pictures I have.
Jeez.
Now, take that with a grain of salt, because I sent a tooth in, and they say it's 5 years old. I'm going to stop sending teeth in because
I would too.
We were hunting a buck on his farm, and that buck, we know for a fact, was at least 7.5 years old because we got sheds from him dating back. And we've watched him, and I got trail camera pictures going back. And the same with this buck. I got trail cameras going back for 4 years. If he's 5 years old as a 2.5-year-old, he was a 150-inch buck. So I don't get it unless he's got an exact twin,
Right.
That's got the exact same configurations. But so I don't know. Maybe that tooth stuff isn't as much of a science as they make it out to be.
Right.
That really is a heck of a story. And the reality is you had to execute your plan perfectly for it to work. So on the flip side, what would you say is the biggest mistake hunters make when scouting and hunting mature bucks?
The biggest one that people make a mistake with is when they find a setup like I just described, and they think they got the world by the and they think, I'm going to kill this buck. This is amazing. You can see where he lives. You can see where he travels. I got the perfect kill tree. It's done.
Right.
They got that in their mind. And the truth of the matter is, I hunt spots like that every day. And I get a buck like that about once a year.
Right.
So you have to put a lot of work in. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. Just because you find something good doesn't mean you don't keep looking. And those bucks have these patterns of, like, they'll be in there for a week or two and then they move on. And you can be there the day he's not there, when he's there for the whole week, except for the day you're there. But then he comes through, smells you're there and stuff, and start over, hit the next bedding area. And, a lot of what I do is I'll go hunt bedding areas like this randomly all over the place and have like a wild start to my season until I really get onto something, and then I'll narrow down on those areas where I'm starting to see real big sign, where where I know something's going on, because you really don't know if a buck made it through the year or something unless you got trail cam pits or something.
Right.
I'm on to like 3 bucks right now that I was hunting last year that I'm like, are they still alive? I can't get a picture of them. I think they're alive. I don't want to go run into their bedding areas and put a camera up and spook the hell out of them.
Right.
But some of it, you have to see sign to really know,
So on the mistake part, with how you killed that deer, obviously you hunted it 2 times. It didn't work. And then you backed out. You just left for the rest of the year.
Yep.
How many guys that would have even went through all of that work to do that would have just not give up, but know that I have to stop or I'm going to screw it up.
Right.
And just keep going, like you said, over and over again, thinking, I'm going to get that deer.
Yeah. Kenny Rogers has a song about that. You got no wind to hold them, no wind to hold them, no wind to walk away, and no wind to run.
Right. So how has the hunting beast style and hunting beast gear helped you and a lot of your followers become better hunters?
Well, I think what I do is I do a good job of portraying reality. I wear what I do on my sleeve, whether I fail or I succeed, and I let everybody see everything. Like I post my whole opening week. I'll post this week too, a video of the hunts. You can see exactly how I went about everything. And where that differs from other people is other people aren't showing their mistakes. They're not showing their failures. They're not showing a hunt where nothing happens. They're not showing how they think about it. So they're just showing the success. And I think you get a lot of people out there that look at somebody who's very successful and they don't realize that guy put in 200 hunts before he, killed that deer, or that he doesn't have a job and that's all he's doing, or, so I think being able to see it realistically and not think that, because if you just heard the story of that hunt I just told you, you would think that, that's a pretty good idea. That's going to work really well for me. But when you realize that I got to do that, a hunt like that 50 times a year to kill something,
right?
It gets a little, because we're hunting public land. It's pressured. There's a lot of guys around, and you can do that whole setup, and then get there and there's a tree stand and a trail camera, and that's the reality of things. So I think portraying the reality is helping people the most, because it's not as easy as it looks from the outside.
Right. And I guess that could do two things. I mean, in one, it's going to show them if you realistically want to kill big deer over and over again, you have to the work you have to put in is crazy, You
have to have some sort of mental obsession. Like you have to have something wrong with your brain to hunt the way I hunt.
Right. But then, some of these guys, they think they're watching these shows like you're talking about, and they think, this is easy. I just got to pick the right spot and they're going to come out and I'm going to kill this giant buck and I could do it every year. And that's just not reality. And not the average every, day Joe. That's just not reality.
Yeah.
So when you're doing these hunts and you're sneaking in there and you find those spots, when you're going in there in the spring and the winter, are you hanging your stand and your sticks then when you find that one perfect tree, or do you bring everything in with you and basically just run and gun and go in and hang it when you climb in there for the first time that year?
So I'm completely mobile. So I take the stand and sticks in on my back when I hunt. I usually don't prep spots. I'm in public land. That's kind of illegal.
Okay.
You can do some prepping. Every state has different laws, and ours you can cut certain, you can cut invasive species, but you better know what you're cutting. And you can cut the tree you're in. You can cut up to 1 inch limbs flush with the tree. So I don't really usually do any type of trimming. I just get in there, get the intel I need, look where I got to be. How can I set up without doing any kind of altering to anything? I look at what's going on and then I get out. But I make sure I get everything I need that first time in. A lot of guys will go in there and they'll look at that and they'll be in awe. And then they go out and then they're like, well, I don't know exactly what tree I got to be in. And then they want to go back.
Right.
You've got to get all that done when you're in there. I mean, do as little damage as you can. Be in there as little as possible. Now, you got to remember, there is no place anywhere where people don't go. Shed hunters. I mean, this isn't the 1800s. People get everywhere.
Right.
So it's a matter of, the least time people are in there, the more a buck's going to be in there, so you go into these places, but don't make a habit of it, is what I'm saying.
So when you're going in there too, and you're making all your notes and making sure you have every detail down, if you're not doing any prep work, you're not giving that spot up to someone else that might just happen to walk through there either. You're keeping that
Correct.
all concealed for yourself. That
Right.
makes sense.
All right. So it's already October. And of course, the guys listening to this are going to ask, is it too late to locate and to scout, find a mature buck to hunt?
No. So as everybody knows, I do a lot of road trips to new areas. and I like to punish myself and go to places that are known for no big bucks and and difficult hunting, and prove I can do it. I don't know. Like I said, there's something wrong with me, but what I do is I guess where they're bedding, and I'll follow sign back. I'll walk a lot. I'll map out where I think the bedding is, and then I'll walk the transitions. I'll walk into where I would hunt. Basically, I'll sneak in there, and if there's no sign, maybe I'll move on to the next spot. Move on. The trouble with that is when I've pre-scouted the spots, a lot of the spots where I've killed a lot of my biggest bucks really don't have no sign coming out.
Really?
But a lot of them do. And if you see the sign, it's the confidence boost of, okay, I'm in the right spot. So like when I go into public land challenges or something, I'm looking for sign, but I'm probably walking through some spots and not hunting them that are probably pretty good spots that I go to, look at them, and go on to the next one. My biggest buck was a 15 pointer, scored in the 180s. That buck bedded in the same spot for 2 years. He would be there almost every west wind. It was an open pasture, and he bedded underneath this willow tree that was kind of like the way it was shaped. It was like bent over, and it was like a dry spot underneath it. And he'd bed in that spot, and he'd watch an access trail that went through. That there's open grass to that trail, and you could see his tracks go across that trail, and you just couldn't get him. I would get out to a point where I could watch him get out of that bed. I picked up one of his sheds in that bed the year before I shot him, and then eventually we had a wind change, and in the middle of the day it changed from west to east, and it was Thanksgiving Day, and I crawled up to his bed with the wind change, figuring he would not change beds because he'd have to walk through open grass to get out of there. I crawled up to some cattails that were 20 yards from the bed, and I jumped up with my shotgun and shot him in his bed. But
Nice.
There wasn't a rub or a scrape within 100 yards of that bed, and he was
Really?
there. Yeah. You know what I see with the rubbing and scraping, and I really believe that that's a competition thing in beds. So if you're hunting in areas that have very few mature bucks, like public land in a lot of cases, like you might be hunting the only deer around that's in that age class. He's got no competition. He doesn't have to rub up that bedding area. Now, the bedding areas I see get tore up the most are usually the ones that 2-year-olds are competing for. Them things will rub everything around the bedding area. They'll have glowing trails going into the bedding area. It'll be like just a neon sign. I bed here, But mature bucks, that ain't always the case. Now that differs, and this is part of the reason I believe it's competition. Now I've gone out and I'll scout people's properties for them. I'll help set up their properties and stuff like that for a fee. And when I go out and I look at managed properties that got like bucket loads of mature bucks on them, those bedding areas will be ripped up. I mean, tore up with giant rubs, because they're competing for them.
Right.
Because one's telling the other one, this is my area, There's two kinds of rubs, the ones that they lay down for the does, like out of aggression with the does, and the kinds where they're marking it for bucks, and they're telling the bucks that, this food source is mine, this bed is mine,
I guess my thought was if there's two different rubs, whether they're for the does or this is mine, how do you tell the difference? I mean, is the ones that where they're marking this and saying this is mine, stay out, are they really shredding those trees then?
Here's the difference I can see, and I don't see a difference in the aggressiveness on the rubs, but if it's a doe bedding area, let's say, and it's got buck rubs in it, because you'll get a bedding area, whether it's a buck bedding area or a doe bedding area, that's got beds all over the place.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of people will be like, well, how do I know if it's a buck or doe bedding area, right? And they'll think it's a buck bedding area because it's got rubs all over the place, right? But you know where those rubs will be? They'll be on the trails. When it's a buck bedding area, they'll be right at the beds. So, I mean, the tree right next to the bed or the one that he's bedding under will be rubbed. It's a way different on where and how they rub them. The downwind trail of the doe bedding area will be all rubbed. There'll be occasional rubs in the bedding area, but not right in the beds. You know what I'm saying? Be
Right.
20 feet away or something. But it's almost like they're marking the individual beds when they when bucks rub in bedding areas.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does. All right, Dan, this is the part of the show we call the lightning round. We ask a series of rapid fire questions and you just answer the first thing that comes to your mind. Are you ready for this?
No, but I'm ready to give it a try.
All right. Question number 1. If you could only hunt one day a year, what day would it be?
November? You said the first thing that comes to my mind.
That was awesome.
Opening day, the majority of my big bucks have come from opening day or opening week. My biggest bucks. So.
Okay. Next question. What is your biggest hunting pet peeve?
Aggressive hunters, like territorial hunters. I hate people that try to push other people out.
Have you seen that a lot? Hunting public land?
Yeah, I think actually it's getting better. I mean, a lot of people are complaining about it more now, but I think that the younger generation of hunters seem to have more respect for people. There's going to be a lot of people that disagree with me, but I've been around a long time. I think when I was younger, people were really, really, the old timers were really territorial about their spots. But it is public land. Nobody should be able to force anybody out. First come, first serve.
Right.
Absolutely. All right, next question. What is your favorite state to hunt?
I love them all. Probably Wisconsin because it's my home state and because I have everything that I could want here. I have every terrain. I have big woods. I have hill country. I have swamps. I have farmland. It's a very diverse state, and I think it's way underrated. I think it's got a lot of great bucks and great genetic here. It does have some overpopulation of hunters, but you can find niches just about in every area of the state to find big bucks.
And really all over the state. I mean,
Yep.
Everyone talks about Buffalo County, but I mean, there's a lot of counties out there that are realistically easier to hunt too, because Buffalo County is not the easiest. They might have big deer, but it's not the best. And there's so many people coming in there, to hunt that the pressure is crazy. So,
Yeah, you look at southwestern Wisconsin, and if you ask me, it rivals Ohio or Indiana or a lot of those other states that people really seek after for big bucks.
Right.
But you don't hear no talk about it.
Right. And it's an over-the-counter tag. That's reasonable too.
Yeah, they do. For first-time hunters, it's $85.
Yes.
For non-resident.
Right. You can't beat that.
Shouldn't even say that. Now we're going to have 7,000 people here this year.
You better edit that out, Steve.
We just boosted the economy. All right, last question, Dan. What is the most important factor, in your opinion, in killing a mature buck?
Probably being mobile. Always moving. I think you could throw all my bed stuff out the window and just take a dart, throw it at a map, and sit where that dart lands, and you'd hunt way better than most people. If you just made sure, no matter what, I'm hunting where that dart lands, I bet you'd have some crazy hunts. I'd like to see a guy do that for a season.
Right.
No, I got one of those analytic minds where I can't do it. I couldn't, even if I wanted to, I couldn't do it. I'd have to have a reason to be someplace. But I think it would force a person into going into those spots that don't look good, and that's what kills bucks. Again, I mean, you look at some of my biggest bucks, they're shot in some of the craziest spots, right alongside the road or in some little patch of cover off to the side where nobody would ever dream to go.
Right.
Great job answering those questions. So if people want to reach out to you, Dan, how can listeners find you online?
My biggest platform is YouTube. You can watch my hunts. There's some pretty cool hunts in there, including the one that we just talked about earlier from last year. If you dig down and find it, that's my biggest platform. You can reach out to me on Facebook. You can reach out to me on my website, which is similar to Facebook. It's a forum, but free speech. We won't ban you for liking or disliking Trump. But Hunt and Beast Gear is where I make products for guys that hunt mobile like me. So you can check that out too.
And then all your other handles, YouTube, Facebook, that's all Hunting Beast as well?
Hunting Beast, or you just search my name.
Well, hey, Dan, thanks for joining us today on the show. You are a great resource for hunters, and we wish you continued success with Hunting Beast Gear.
Appreciate that. I hope you guys have a lot of success with this podcast.
Thanks for coming on, Dan.
We enjoyed visiting with Dan Infalt here on the Rack Factor podcast, presented by Rack Fuel Premium Deer Nutrition. Listeners of this episode can enjoy 20% off premium deer mineral, feed, or food plot seed by entering the code BEAST, that's BEAST, the first time at checkout. Visit rackfuel.com now for 20% off premium deer nutrition products and fuel your herd.